Hi everyone, Stjepan here. In today's middle game video, I'm going to continue the central pawn structure themed videos with the open center. In the previous video, we went over the closed center positions and blocked center positions. And now we are going to go over something completely different, which gives you completely different games, and that's the open center. Now, generally, in this example I've set up, you can see what the open center really is, and that's when the D file and the E files are open. But you could apply the same principles to positions with a semi-open center, because they often tend to open up completely, and they are nothing like the closed center. So if you imagined a pair of pawns being on the D file, then that's the semi-open center or on the E file, and it's still it's still different to closed center positions, in which you can't really have that much piece activity, and piece activity becomes more important even if the center is semi-open. In the completely open center, piece activity is the key. And piece activity is what you should be looking for the most. Piece activity is what usually decides the game, and very often you are going to have strong and fast attacking chances, even though the game has just unfolded. So, despite this pawn structure being drawing and likely to end in a draw if an endgame occurs. Of course, if there are no pieces on the board like here, then this is just a draw, because neither side can create a passed pawn. Despite that, the middle games tend to be extremely volatile, very attacking, double-edged. Neither side really knows what's going on very often, and two most important things are your piece activity and your attacking chances, and your king safety. So if you can manage to keep your king safe and keep your pieces active, then you're going to be better. So in the open center, I'm going to use this same pawn structure with the pieces on the board in an overwhelmingly better position for white. Okay. In the open pawn center, what you want the most is piece activity, as I said. Firstly, if you have the open files, whether it's a semi-open center or an open center, you want to take that file. In this example, white has everything he wants to get. If you look at this position once again, imagine your rooks on f1 and on a1. You want your rooks on the open files. Ideally, you want them doubled on the same file. So, for example, in this position, put the rooks on e1 and e2. White is controlling the open e file. That will enable a very important theme in open positions, and that's a rook infiltration. This is one of the patterns which is absolutely essential to understanding open positions and to playing better chess in the middle game. You should always strive for outposts or squares for your rooks on the 7th rank or the 2nd rank of your opponent's position. So here, if you manage to double the rooks, you might just be able to infiltrate your opponent's position. A rook on the 7th rank is one of the most dangerous pieces in the game. Furthermore, you want your bishops looking towards your opponent's king. So if you can get your bishops on these two squares, looking at these diagonals, then your bishops will be as active as possible. Thirdly, you want your queen somewhere near the king. Fourthly, your bishops are usually going to be better than your knights. Why is that so? Let's look at this position once again. In general, of course, the bishop can control more squares, and the bishops can control both sides of the board. Firstly, it might be useful in the endgame, and it will be useful in the endgame, because if you have this bishop, your opponent has this knight, you both have pawns on the A and the B file, and let's say the H file, then your bishop is able to control multiple squares and is able to stop two pawns, for example, in some positions, and your opponent's knight isn't able to do the same thing. So knights are worse than bishops in open center endgames if there are pawns on both sides of the board, but they're also worse in the open center middle game, because they don't provide as much attacking chances. And if the center is open, the bishop has more scope. The bishop needs to be opened up, and the bishop wants to have the E and the D file open, so that it can control multiple squares, both sides of the board, and attack and defend at the same time. If you put this knight anywhere on the board, it's not going to control as many squares. Knights thrive in closed positions where they can look for outposts, and they are sort of naked in open positions. So put a knight in the open center, it's going to be vulnerable to attacks. Put a bishop in the open center, and it's going to behave as if it were a queen. So take the open file. As you can see in this over-exaggerated example, you want to take the open file, double up your rooks, possibly infiltrates to the 7th rank. You want to put your queen as close as possible to your opponent's king. You want to have the bishops, if possible, instead of the knights, and you want to point them towards your opponent's king. Okay, so this was an over-exaggerated example. Let's look at a possible example. Okay, so this is once again the same pawn structure as here. 3 pawns each on the queen side, 3 pawns each on the king side. The open center, open D and D file. Completely symmetrical, even the piece position is symmetrical. Now what do you do with white here? Grandmasters would highly likely agree to a draw here, because they are so good that there are no possibilities for a mating attack coming up, or some significant structural weaknesses or anything else. And with players who are lower rated than grandmasters, anything can happen here. And if you follow the principles here, then you might just come out of this with an advantage. These positions could come out of the Petrov, the Roy Lopez, many e4 openings. So okay, what do you do here? White to play. There isn't one winning move, of course. There's nothing you can do to just make your opponent resign. But the key here is to incrementally improve your piece position and try to create some pressure. Ideally take the open files and infiltrate the 7th rank. You don't have the queens on the board, so it's not very likely that you are going to force your opponent into a mating attack or a mating net, so you have to do something else. The first thing, take the open file. So a move like rook a to d1 might be an idea, saving the move rook f to e1 for later. Your opponent should challenge you, not let you do that. So let's say your opponent challenges you on the d file immediately. What do you do next? Is there any active square for your knight or for your bishop? So you need to look for these. If you come here and here, your opponent will take your bishop. If you go here, you're looking at the f7 square, but is that really important? And now you start to see some attacking chances. My bishop isn't really active on e2. If I put it on c4, it's going to stare at f7, and then if I play knight to g5 or knight to e5, I will have double pressure on the f7 square, indirectly undefending this rook with the other rook, and then I can either take the open file or win the f7 pawn. So let's say you play that. Let's say your opponent plays, I don't know, bishop here. You play here. Now there's pressure on f7. What does your opponent do? He can either chase your knight away or do something else. But this is the general way to play these positions. When you have a position with the open center, you want to get as active as possible. I wrote that structural weaknesses aren't as important. They will become more important as the material gets traded off. The less material on the board, the more important structural and static weaknesses are. In this position already, I wouldn't recommend sacrificing something or doubling up your pawns, because it's highly likely that it's going to be an endgame. But if there is material on the board, especially the queens, you can often sacrifice and accept weaknesses in order to get piece activity. It's almost always more important to have active pieces than a pawn or something, a bit of material. So always look for piece activity. Doubling up your rooks on the open files, getting your bishop to the most active squares, getting your knight into the game, ideally attacking something. Just try to restrain your opponent's pieces, try to activate your own pieces. Whoever manages to double up the rooks on one file here is going to be almost winning. Because if you manage to infiltrate while keeping your opponent's rooks defending the f7 square, for example, if you manage to get this position, with your rooks here, one of your rooks on f7, then you are winning on d7, I'm sorry. So those are the general principles. These were some extreme examples. Of course, the position can be differently open, and usually you will have traded off some pieces already, but there are positions where the open center occurs right out of the opening with all the pieces on the board. We are going to look at positions like those. The first position I wanted to show you is Chigorin-Roy Lopez, played between Boleslavsky and Keres. Paul Keres played the Chigorin here with knight to a5. And the closed Roy Lopez, I mean, the name says closed Roy Lopez, but very often the center can get exploded and it can open, and it can open in a matter of moves. And that exactly happened here. Here, Paul Keres played a very strange move. Usually people play c takes d4 here, opening up the center. That's by far the most common move. He played rook to d8, which is kind of strange, rare, but fine. Okay. Knight to f1, a thematic Roy Lopez maneuver by Isaac Boleslavsky, coming into these two squares, controlling f5. And now it starts happening, d5. And when you get this sort of tension in the center, that means that the center is going to be open. I want to try and show you how to recognize whether the center is going to be open and how to decide whether you want to open it or not. So as soon as Keres plays d5 here, this means that something is going to break open. You just can't keep this tension, especially because black has 3 pawns in the center, you have 2, so you have to do something. So e takes d5, e takes d4, not recapturing on d5, c takes d4, knight takes d5, and now already look at this position, okay, and look at this position. This is now completely blown open, and whoever has more piece activity is going to be better. Queen to e2, getting the queen to attack the bishop, the knight can't move, bishop to b7, defending the knight, knight to g3, and now c takes d4, knight takes d4. Now the center is, the center has collapsed. The center has collapsed, and who is better here? Now that's the question. The engines give this a slightly better for black. I think it's about equal. Both sides have the bishop pair, which is great. Black's bishop pair is much better, that's obvious, because the b7 bishop is the best piece on the board. Definitely. The knight on a5, the Roy Lopez Chigoring knight, is misplaced, but it can come back into the game via c4 or c6. Okay, the knight is sort of weird on d5, the bishop is okay on e7, it could come to this diagonal afterwards and be great. But the main thing is that you don't really know who is better according to the normal standards, like king safety, pawn structure, etc. The only thing that matters here in this highly complex position is piece activity. How often do you see a position with the c, d and the e files completely open without any pawns on them, with all the pieces on the board? This is extremely hard to play. And open center positions are going, with pieces on the board, are going to require loads of calculation and loads of tactical prowess. So here, your main idea should be restrict your opponent's pieces and activate your own. So so Keres' next move makes a lot of sense. He played g6. g6 restricts the knights from coming into f5. If a knight should jump into f5, then it's going to be really scary. Bishop h6 was played here by Isaac Boleslavsky, which the engines don't like, but I think it's a human move. It's an okay move, improving your bishop, getting your bishop next to your opponent's king. A much better try was bishop e4, and after bishop f8, Keres would have to defend the dark squares, queen f3, knight to c4, continuing the game like this. This is supposed to be equal. After bishop h6, for some reason, Keres is completely winning. It's -2 already. Here, in this position, bishop to f6 was played, which is also a mistake, but you shouldn't really listen to the engines in positions like these, because it's really hard to understand the positions. You should simply focus on how do I get my piece more active. Ask each and every one of your pieces in this open center, what is the most active square for you? I think bishop f6 is a mistake, and the engines agree. They give it as equal now, but not because of what the engine thinks. I think that once the bishop was here, why would you want it looking at this knight and at this diagonal? I mean, this can be easily defended. I would even give up this pawn. I don't really care. I want my bishop here. I want to attack the king. I have both of my bishops staring at the king. I'm going to activate my rooks. Why would I want to attack the puny b2 pawn? I don't really care about that. In this position, Boleslavsky continued with knight to b3, just giving up his pawn, challenging this knight. Knight c4, now the pawn is attacked twice, knight to e4 attacking the bishop, bishop b2, knight b to c5. And after black had won this pawn, the game is now busted for white, apparently. Once again, I wanted to show you this example because I don't really understand it. The engines give it as -4 for black. Okay, Boleslavsky did give up a pawn and he is about to give up the exchange. But it's still losing here, this is -2 almost, and when he decided to give up the exchange, this is now -4, and after rook takes, I have to agree with Boleslavsky actually, because he is thinking, how can I create the most menacing attack possible? Okay, in order to do that, he would like to utilize the dark squared weaknesses around the black king. If you have seen my video on weak color complexes, that this is a very thematic example. Black's dark squares are terminally weak, and the bishop is the best defender of the dark squares. So, sorry. delete. So the bishop, if traded off, is going to weaken the black king. So he reasons, okay, I'm going to give up the exchange. Bishop takes a1, rook takes a1, and he plays, and in this position, Keres plays f5, trying to stop that. But now Boleslavsky has weakened Keres' dark squares, and if he manages to get his pieces around the king, then he's going to be winning. A simple move such as knight to g5 and queen to e6 check could already bring him in trouble, could already bring Keres in trouble. So here, I mean, he took on b7. I'm just wondering about this move. Yeah, it doesn't work because the knight can defend. But you can find ideas like these, and I think that from a human perspective, Boleslavsky played a great game. Keres defended, so let's see what happened. Knight takes b7, queen takes b7, knight to c5 was played. Now the engine does give knight to g5. I think this was a good idea. But still, knight to c5, queen to c6. Yeah, not trading the queens, of course, you are down in material. And now, yeah, it ended pretty soon. Boleslavsky messed up. He didn't get here. He resigned. He didn't get enough of an attack. If he takes, he loses. If he moves his king to h1, this is checkmate. After knight f3, if he plays g takes f3, I think just queen to e2. Yeah, queen to e2. Let's say king h1, queen f3 check, king to g1. Yeah, queen f2 check here and here. So let's go back to this position to move 12. Here, Keres played a weird move, rook to d8, but still playable, knight f1, and after d5 things started happening. And in a matter of moves, ed5, ed5, cd4, knight d5, queen e2, bishop b7, knight g3, cd4, knight d4. This is now an open center with tremendous danger for both players. I mean, nobody could say who's going to win this position. There is no preparation that could help you. You're just going to sit down at the board and say, okay, I'm trying to play it as best as I can, and I have to be tactically better than my opponent. In this case, Boleslavsky's exchange sacrifice wasn't sound, but as I said, in a real game, I would be really tempted to do that. I mean, look at the position after g6. Here, firstly, he can perhaps win the light squared bishop, takes. Look at those weaknesses here. I mean, it's really easy to exploit them. Which piece would you rather have, the h6 bishop or the rook on a8? I think the question is simple. So, okay, let's look at the second example. This is a modern game. Both were, by the way, played at the candidates tournament. The first one in '53 in Zurich, and this one last year in Berlin in the candidates. And in this game, Kuryakin played Caruana. Caruana plays his Petrov, of course. And yeah, okay, let's look at this game. Kuryakin had the white pieces. In this position, Caruana castled, and we have bishop to f3. This center is for now just semi-open, but it's going to be completely open. The thing that you can see Kuryakin doing, he's pointing both of his bishops towards the black king. And in this game, Caruana decided to castle queenside, even though castling kingside is much more common. This is the Nimzovich variation of the Petrov. And now the game continues bishop to g4, trying to exchange the dangerous bishop. And now, a very interesting decision. We've just been discussing Boleslavsky's exchange sacrifice. In this position, Kuryakin sacrificed an exchange as well, but his exchange sacrifice is much sounder. In this position, he took on d5, and we have bishop takes d1, rook takes d1. Let's assess the position. The open center is now completely open. There are no pawns on the e and the d files. White has the bishop pair, black has rook and bishop. Which piece would you rather have, bishop on d5 or rook on g8? I would rather have the bishop. The game continued queen to c7 and c4. Now, with this open center, what do you do with white? You want to have as much piece activity as possible. I don't think there is a better square in the world for this bishop than d5. And I think that this bishop is as good as both rooks in this position. If there weren't for the fact that black can sacrifice the exchange back, I would think that the bishop is better than both rooks. This bishop is just amazing. In conjunction with the queen, the bishop and the rook, this is actually a very strong attacking setup. So let's go back to this position. After castles, bishop to f3 was stage 1, looking at this pawn. Perhaps thinking of an exchange sacrifice even before bishop f3. Bishop g4, and now he does go for that. Bishop takes d5, bishop takes d1, rook takes d1, queen to c7, c4. Now let's continue the game. Rook g to e8. Of course, Caruana is no petzer. He knows how to play chess, and he's taking up the open files. And if he manages to exchange some more material, if he manages to exchange the queens, for example, then he's going to have a winning endgame. Queen to f2, looking at this pawn. b6, solidifying the structure, but weakening some more light squares. And I don't know, I would be really scared to play b6. g4, expanding on the king side, bishop f6, trying to get his bishop to the most active diagonal. You can see that Caruana is playing very thematic chess. He's playing the best moves. From a human perspective, I don't even know what the engine thinks. I didn't look at this game with the engine because I found it interesting. Since I played the Nimzovich attack in the Petrov, I play knight to c3. Let me just show you what the opening is. We'll go back to this. So e4, e5, here, and this is where you play knight to c3, allowing black to double up your pawns, and then you castle queenside. I think this setup is great, the Nimzovich attack. So let's go back. b6, g4, bishop to f6. King b1 was played in this position by Kuryakin. King safety, #1 priority. Rook to d7. Caruana goes and doubles up his rooks. This game is very thematic for an open center, and it should be studied as a textbook example. Rook to d3. This move is important because it gives the rook an outpost, firstly. So the bishop can move without the rook being trapped and captured with check. Secondly, the rook can come to g3 in some positions, putting pressure on the g file. So a very versatile, useful move. g5, trying to stop white's expansion. King to a2, rook e to e7, queen to f3, and now there are already some ideas of this. Okay, king to d8, bishop to d2, challenging black's best piece, and I think that's a very good idea. If in an open center you see that your opponent has a very active piece and you have its inactive counterpart, it's the best idea is to just trade it off. So I think this was a very good plan. King c8, queen f1, rook d6, and now fg5, bishop g5, bishop g5, hg5, queen f5 check. The queen is infiltrating now. Once again, which piece would you rather have? The rook on e7 or the bishop? The point is that the rook doesn't really have that many infiltration squares which are useful. If it does come to e2, okay, it might win a pawn or two, but in meanwhile, white might just checkmate black. Now the king is already very restricted. Rook d7, pinning himself. Queen takes g5, winning a pawn. Queen to e5, trying to exchange the queens, which is a great idea if you're getting slaughtered. Queen h6, declining, threatening a check here. King d8, g5, queen d6, queen h8 check, rook e8, queen h4, queen g6, queen g4, and now just marching his pawns. And from here on, this was a fairly simple win for Kuryakin. This position, let me just turn on the engine to see, is +3. You're an exchange down, this is +3. And the point is that Kuryakin activated all of his pieces perfectly. He found an exchange sacrifice which will amplify his attack and increase the value of his bishop as opposed to the rook, which is still on the board for black, which didn't really do anything during the game. And then he found the plan of pushing his kingside pawns. So sometimes in an open center, you're not just going to checkmate. You might have to change your plans into something else. Even though you've sacrificed an exchange, it doesn't mean that you have to checkmate. Try to think positionally, strategically, and tactically as well. Okay, let's look at the third example. This game, Kuryakin just won. This was a very interesting game. This is the floor system in the closed Rui Lopez. Once again, you can see this pawn tension on the D and the E file, and once again, in a matter of moves, you are going to see the center blow up. d4 was played. This is a game between Yangi and Batista. Batista took on e4, rook takes e4, bishop e7, rook e2, e4, knight d4. No more center. No more center. Okay. Once again, you have all the pieces on the board. And yeah, once again, it's a fairly complex position. How do you create a plan here? Who is better here? Well, Batista has the thematic rule of has bishop on b7. And I think that's a very good piece if you manage to get c5, and he's going to get c5 in. Black, on the other hand, is faced with two very strong bishops from white. White's dark squared bishop is much better than black's. Black is perhaps faced with a rook lift, and perhaps is faced with queen to h5 if the bishop gets exchanged off. So I think White has a greater attacking potential, and one piece is most important here, which I didn't mention yet. This is the knight on d4, which is able to come to f5. If the knight comes to f5, then black is going to be in trouble. The other knight, of course, can support f5 via g3 or e3. So the game continued bishop f8. I think in this position, Bruzon Batista recognized that he has to exchange some pieces off because he's going to be in trouble, and well, the ensuing endgame is about to be equal if the pieces get traded off, but I think if they don't, he thought he was going to get mated or something. Rook to d2, declining a trade, doubling up on the d file, and this is what I was talking about. This decision is very important. In an open center, don't trade the pieces if it's not to your advantage. If you have more piece activity and if you have the initiative, which White definitely does have here, then you don't want to trade off the pieces. Rook to d2 is a very sensible move, just pressuring, putting pressure on the d file and threatening to win the queen in some positions with this check. Queen c7, getting away from the d file. Bishop f5, the most active square. Look at these pieces. The only inactive pieces are the knight on f1 and the rook on a1, but that's perhaps going to change. c5, chasing the knight away. Knight to f3. Knight to e5, challenging the knight. Knight e5, rook e5, knight e3, defending the bishop. Now only the a1 rook is inactive. Queen to c6. ab5 opening the file, and this is a decision I would like to talk about. This game, Yangi Bruzon Batista 2015, ended in a draw, and I think this is the reason. Generally, when you have an open center, it's good to keep an eye out on what's going on the queen side and on the king side as well. In this position, Yangi must have thought that his rook on a1 was inactive, and how do you activate the rook? So he figured the best way to do that is to open up the a file and then trade off the rooks. And this decision I don't really support. Even though your piece is inactive on a1, I think that opening up the queen side to white, to black, I'm sorry, doesn't give you that much play anymore. So what happened was ab5, rook a8, bishop a8, bishop f6, queen f6, rook d8. He did infiltrate, he did get something, but that's really not enough. You traded a pair of rooks, you gave a lot of play to black. The bishops are still great. The bishop is now attacked, so, well, I mean, it doesn't really... Yeah, it doesn't look like that much for white. I mean, let's see what the engine says. Yeah, it's +1, but I mean, I don't really think it's that much. Yeah, sometimes I really don't understand the engine evaluations. I'm sorry. I wonder if you could help me here. Why do you think this is so much better for white? In this position, the bishop is hanging, so he should save it. But he played g6, trading of pieces. I'm not sure, perhaps this trade does help, gf5. Yeah, now I agree that white is better. But anyway, it's not that important, that's not the point of the lesson. I wanted to go back to this position to move 16 after bishop g5. So the center gets opened up, and he does a very good job activating his pieces. I'm not sure, well, okay, bishop to f5 is an okay move, but I think c5 is coming, and I would want to preserve the chance to play knight to f5. So perhaps bishop to f5 was a strange decision. The second strange decision was opening up the a file. In this position, I would definitely consider either rook to c1, trying to open the c file instead, or knight to g3. Let's say rook to c1, let's say c5 here, and knight f5. How is this position? How is this that much better for black? But anyway, I think my knight is much better here. Perhaps I might play bishop to f1 later and queen to c2 and rook c to d1. So, open center positions are very complex. Whether you like to play with a closed center or an open center will depend on your style. I believe I myself prefer closed positions because I'm not a good tactical player. I think I'm better at creating strategic plans, so I often find that I get good positions from closed centers more easily than from open centers. Let me know what you think. Please give me feedback on the video. I hope you liked it. Thanks very much for all the support, and stay tuned for more chess. See you later. Bye bye.